This is Story Time, Lesson 116. Today we're going to read The Tale of Peter Rabbit, one of Miss Ellie's favorites. I'm sure most of you probably know this story. Peter's kind of a mischievous bunny rabbit. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit, one morning, "you may go into the field or down the lane, but do not go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going to be going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took her basket and her umbrella, and she went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden, and he squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuce and some French beans, then he ate some radishes, and then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But around the end of the cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor. Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting young cabbages, but he jumped up and he ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, but he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and then the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have gotten away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net, and he got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with big brass buttons, and it was quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement, and they implored him to exert himself. That means try to get out of the net. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop on top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out of the net just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and he rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not been full of so much water. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully and look under each one. Presently, Peter sneezed. "Ka-choo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out the window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter, so he just went back to work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very, very wet from sitting in that water can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the woods. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him, and Peter began to cry. Then Peter tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came upon a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back to the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the sound of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed up upon a wheelbarrow and peeked over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down, and he went very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could along the straight walk behind some blackberry bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was out, safe at last in the woods outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for the scarecrows to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running, and he never looked behind him till he got home to his big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole, and he shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made him some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter, 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, they had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end. Peter was not a very good little rabbit, but maybe he learned his lesson not to go back to Mr. McGregor's garden again.